Thank you, Dennis. We are listening, and that was just tremendous. We appreciate you. And good morning, Seal Beach. What a glorious day. All week I've been talking to my wife, who was up in Seattle, and she's a little envious because it's been like 43 degrees up there and raining. And so she's saying, well, when can I come down? So we're working on that. But I want to thank everyone here for all your love and support this past week. It's just been awesome. And I've really come to enjoy and really embrace this Seal Beach community. You know, enjoying the Main Street shops and the fishing pier and the beach, but especially the restaurants. Now, I'm not sure they're so friendly to my waistline, but so speaking of restaurants, this week, I think it was Thursday night, Reverend Guy Williams, who many of you know, he's a good friend of mine, came up, I guess, and we had dinner together. And we both said that if we were 15 to 20 years younger, we'd want a candidate in this community because it is such a vibrant, dynamic community. You have so much going for you, such talent, beautiful location. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything more. I mean, you're right on a main road here. And, you know, not many centers have that kind of exposure. So it's really very special. And we ate at Bistro Saint Germain. So it was just highly recommended. So anyway, I hadn't seen Guy for a couple of years, and I said we were prayer partners at one point, and we were talking about the stages of life, especially the Hindu stages of life, and talking about that where we're at. And you know, you get two ministers together, and you can bet that there's going to be a lot of talking. Fortunately, Guy had to go back home, so we ended relatively early, but we could have lasted into the wee hours. But we did talk at length about those four stages of life that the Hindus talk about. The first one is called the student stage. And so this is in your 20s where you're just taking in all of this life experience, learning everything you can about maybe a new job or something like that, and starting out in relationships. The second stage is called the householder stage. So this is probably starting in your early 30s where you're getting pretty well established in a career and maybe starting a family, getting a house, settling into that stage where you're also acquiring stuff, right? So we all are familiar with that. The third stage is called the forest dweller. The forest dweller. And that's usually from 50 to 80, say. And we both agreed that that's the stage that we're in, where you start to let go of all that getting stuff, letting go of the importance of a career, and really having this deep desire to go deeper, to move into deeper forms of meditation and spiritual practice, just establishing that place of being a wisdom keeper or elderhood, as they describe it. Now, it's interesting, we both agreed that we are there, and we're talking about in this Western culture, it isn't really a phase of life that is celebrated. There isn't a place to have the wisdom keepers speaking back to the younger people, to the community. I don't know if any of you feel like that, but what happens very often is people try to stay in that householder stage of going back and doing youthful things because this culture really emphasizes that youth culture, right? There isn't much credence given to people that have a lot of life experience. So the fourth stage is called renunciation, and that's where older people move into this place of kind of backing away from what has been important previously in their lives and start to reflect. It's also called a harvest time, where you reflect on your life and see that everything has been a gift and how valuable that has been and brought you to this place in your life where you can really celebrate who you have become. So it got me thinking about stages and states of consciousness. And the difference between a stage and a state, at least to me, a stage seems sort of like a hierarchy. You go through these different spots, whereas a state can be an emotional, spiritual place that you're at any one time. And states can really be changing. And even with stages, there's not a clear delineation. In India, there's less emphasis now on the householder and on the forest dweller and the renunciate. And that's because India is shifting into more of a youth culture. And so that wisdom keeper role is somewhat being diminished as well. So it's a very interesting place to be in. And what happens when we're looking at this emotional state that we're in or reflecting on the stage of our life, we tend to create a story about ourselves, don't we? This is my story. I came from this place, and this is what happens. And sometimes we can get stuck in that. And the reality is it's all okay because we were born that way. And that's the title of my talk today, is Born This Way. I want to talk about those states of consciousness and that concept of time that we have in these different states. So the first state that I'd like to talk about is best illustrated by this story, and I'm sure you've all heard it before. It's called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters. So the first chapter is this. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Now, our relationship to time in that is linear, right? And we move clockwise, usually very quickly because time in our lives is out of control. We're victims. So the second chapter is, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I still don't see it, so I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. It isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Can anyone relate to that? Maybe in your youth, falling in, having a chronic condition, and just claiming that it's not my fault. It's always something else. The third chapter, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit, but it's my fault. I know where I am, and I get out immediately. And maybe I take my first personal development class. Right? The fourth chapter, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. I'm becoming more self-aware. I'm still in a rush, still spinning clockwise, out of control in many ways, but at least I've become aware. The fifth chapter, I walk down a different street. And maybe on that street, there's a Center for Spiritual Living. And I step in there and start that journey. Now, even in that liberated awareness, is it possible that we can still fall back into the hole? Sure it is. It happens all the time. We feel sometimes in our lives that we're a victim. And, of course, we're just born that way. It's natural. Now, the next state is a state of what I call self-empowerment, right? You've heard this before. If it's to be, it's up to me, right? I'm going to make it happen. We've let go of the victimhood and said, well, I'm going to make a difference in my life. So what I know is, and I know this very well, is we start to try to control time. We're still spinning in a clockwise direction, marching along linearly, but we may look at taking a class in time management. Now, I know this very well because for years in corporations, I taught a class that was called Effective Time Management. And I look back at that now and I can smile, but it was an important skill set in an organization, right? Because it also formed the basis of classes that I taught in supervisory management, in managerial training, leadership management, and all of that. And everybody had to get on the same page. And so it was very effective in accomplishing some things. We set goals, we use what is called willpower to make things happen, right? And we pride ourselves in having that kind of discipline. Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talks about this. And he says, people use willpower to climb the corporate ladder. And the challenge with that is that there can be unintended side effects of willpower, of trying to climb the corporate ladder, getting to the top, celebrating, being so happy, and coming home to your significant other and wanting to celebrate, and you know what? Nobody's home. Because they've had enough of this workaholism. Workaholics are the only socially sanctioned addiction in our culture, right? We look up at that and say, well, he's a driver, she's a driver. She knows to just kind of make it happen. And then we say, okay, well, on my way up the corporate ladder, I also gained about 30 pounds. But I know willpower really well, and I can use it. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work the same. And so we struggle with this concept of willpower because it doesn't always work. And we're back at the same place of feeling powerless and perhaps falling into victimhood again. And we just can simply recognize it's okay. We were born that way. It's part of our human condition. Because there's still not enough time, no matter how efficient we are in the use of time. So in this householder stage, we also find that that use of willpower and goal setting can be exhausting, right? We just get tired of it. Have we ever heard the saying, putting your nose to the grindstone? Now, you know where that came from. So in the olden days, there was a miller, and the job of the miller was to take the community grain and grind it. And people were watching Mr. Miller and saying, he's always got his nose to the grindstone. Why in the world is he doing that? Well, the purpose of that is to smell the flour and make sure it wasn't getting burnt, because that would ruin the flour. And so he always had his nose to the grindstone, and it was seen as a virtue. That's where it all began, seen as a virtue to work real hard until you're exhausted. Interesting, isn't it? So we can't help it. We're born that way. So at the next stage, we're starting to realize there's got to be a better way. The next state that we're talking about is that, we want to say we're moving to this point of surrender, right? Of realizing that we can't control everything. We're still moving in a linear direction. We're still moving clockwise. And this is very important, that we are still entrapped by this concept of time. So maybe at this stage, we're lucky to get more serious and maybe take a science of mind class for the first time, or move into these higher level skills of meditation and increased self-awareness. maybe we're not so tightly bound to time as we were before. We're now not wound up about it. And we get to that place of recognizing, and you've all heard this before, let go and let God, right? So that starts working on our consciousness to say there's got to be a better way. So we begin entertaining the idea of transcending this physical reality in order to get more spiritual. You know what I mean? Of moving into that place where there's more going on by letting go. So then maybe we meet some forest dwellers, those people that are, deeply into spiritual practice, and we use them as mentors, and we say, I want to be like you. We begin to have a different relationship with time as we move into that phase. And maybe we get glimpses through meditation and self-awareness of timelessness, right? Of being able to see a glimpse of a greater reality, of developing a deep yearning for that connection. And so we have a little slide that illustrates this. It's a poem by Rumi called Love Dogs. We have that, John? So I'll start. One night, a man was crying, Allah, Allah. His lips grew sweet with the praising, until a cynic said, so, I have heard you calling out, but have you ever gotten any response? The man had no answer for that. He quit praying and fell into a confused sleep. He dreamed he saw Kadir, the guide of souls in the thick green foliage. Why did you stop praising? Because I never heard anything back. This longing you express is the return message. The grief you cry out from draws you toward union. Your pure sadness that wants help is the secret cup. Listen to the moan of a dog for its master. That whining is the connection. There are love dogs no one knows the names of. Give your life to be one of them. Can I hear a howl? See, there's a pack of love dogs here. One of the challenges in that is that yearning can still feel unfulfilled, right? And we can fall back to, well, I've got to take another class. If it's to be, it's up to me, right? Or even into that victimhood is I'm helpless. I can't really feel that connection. I don't know what that means to have that yearning. And it's okay because we're born that way, right? It's okay. So the last state is really celebrating who we are and the life that we've led. It's a totally different relationship with time. And it's best illustrated by this next slide of the whirling dervish, the Sufi. And in that dance, you'll notice the Sufi has one hand up to the heavens and the other is down to the ground. And he's turning counterclockwise. If you look at a lot of dances of different religions, they move counterclockwise, exhibiting that this is a place unstuck in time, exhibiting this place of timelessness that we can see glimpses of, and we want to spend a lot of time there. And part of that is accepting the perfection of right where you are. Right where you are. You are perfect, whole, and complete. If You ever heard that before? Maybe with a practitioner in the ideal treatment will remind you that you are perfect, whole, and complete right where you are. And it's important to use the present tense just for that reason, not looking to some future event where you will be perfect, but right here and right now, no matter what your situation, circumstance, or condition, you are perfect, whole, and complete. I'd like to look at that with a quote by Amoda Ma Jivan. And this is what she says. Awakening is no longer about abandoning or transcending physical reality to live a spiritual life. Awakening is no longer about abandoning or transcending physical reality to live a spiritual life. It's the fulfillment of our divine destiny by living the truth of our inner radiance while in our earthly bodies. I'll say it again. Awakening is no longer about abandoning or transcending physical reality to live a spiritual life. It's the fulfillment of our divine destiny by living the truth of our inner radiance while in our earthly bodies. Does that make sense? Yeah. There's a book out that's called Even Mystics Have Bills to Pay. Now, in this awakening, we can awaken to that, and yet we still have the option to hit the snooze button, right? Or we can howl about that lost connection that we feel, or try to make things happen again to get back to that mystical place of absolute knowing that you're connected. Or we can say, you know, this always happens to me. Go back to that victimhood. So these states are very malleable, that we can move from one to another, no matter how evolved we feel that we're getting. But the key is we tend to spend less time in those other states. We recognize that we've fallen into that hole more quickly and that we can get out. We go to see a practitioner to help us climb out, right? Or we see that someone's offering a class that just resonates in our heart that really makes sense. Or we remember our spiritual practice and we look at that closely and say, you know, what has my spiritual practice been in the last week? Not up to where it was. And that's a natural thing because we're only human. We were born that way. So as we move into this holiday season, let's just be more gentle with ourselves. Rachel, I loved your quotes from Pema Chodron about that. Be here now. Love where we are right now. Be gentle with ourselves. Be kinder to ourselves and all of those around us. Because we have to remember they were born that way. Our purpose is to fill our hearts with gratitude. To fill our hearts as we look around. Everywhere we see there are opportunities to make that happen, to let that happen, to be aware of it happening, that we can be unstuck in time like the Sufi. Right where we are is okay. We raise that one hand to heaven, the other to the ground. That's what they mean by being grounded in the present moment, right here and right now. And I'd like to end with this quote from Ralph Marston and invite you to remember it as we move into Thanksgiving. With an attitude of gratitude, you'll realize that you already have it all. Everything you could ever desire is already inside you. Appreciate it. Love it. Nurture it enough so it becomes fully expressed in your life. Because you were born this way. And so it is. Thank you.